started at school before the trees up there, took it down this road here this way, and it kept bearing off to the left. But they had to get out because they were cadets. They're going to be able to let it go down far.
It's down just this side of the intersection, the big intersection.
The fuselage burned up over here in these trees, and they got out and burned it all the way to that house.
It's Monday, April 5, 2021, and yesterday, April 4, I spent Easter afternoon at the crash site of Southern Flight 242. This is a crash that happened in April of 1977, so a full 44 years ago. Wow, what a visit, and my hat's off and personal thanks to the folks in New Hope, Georgia, where this crash site is, that got together and with their own money, their own ingenuity, their own time, independent of every government organization, built and organized their own organization and memorial, and they dedicated this memorial site to those passengers and survivors from that flight. That happened yesterday afternoon. You can see that service in the description. I'll include a link to that video so you can see it. They did a nice job on everything. There was a lot of people there. This was an out-of-body experience to be there and be with those people at this thing. And I am on a warpath here in light of what I learned about this accident. You know, I've lived in Georgia. I've always heard about this accident. I'm a DC-9 captain myself. I'd always heard about this accident because they flew through a hailstorm and hail flamed out the engines. I didn't really give much thought to it, even though I've actually been to this crash site a couple times. Never really entered my mind until I got to digging around on this thing a lot yesterday. So I've got a couple things I'm going to read here, but yesterday during the day, we did some interviews with the people. There was one flight attendant on site that was there, and she was on the aircraft. She survived that day. Sandy Pearl, she was there. I've got her interview. I've also got 3 interviews with relatives of those who lost their lives on that flight. Those interviews are on there. I'll also have an interview with Boney, the director of maintenance for Southern Air. He's a DC-3 guy, DC-9 guy. He was the #1 maintenance guy that got dispatched to that site, arrived at the crash scene about an hour after it crashed, and he stayed up there for about 30 days working on that crash and getting it cleaned up and helping people the best that he could on behalf of Southern Airways at the time. So I've got all that coming. This is a very long video. I apologize. I did not mean to get wrapped up in this video, but this is critically important. The more I learned off of this thing, the more wrapped around the axle I got. And I'm going to read you some of the stuff that I found out just recently in the past couple of days coming up with this thing. The board, the NTSB, actually disagreed with themselves as the probable cause of this particular accident. This is just amazing, but the board, the National Transportation Safety Board, determined the probable cause to be the total, quote, total and unique loss of thrust from both engines while the aircraft was penetrating an area of severe weather. Well, board member Francis McAdams dissented, stating that the majority belief was, quote, was merely a statement of what happened rather than an explanation of why. Yes, it's just a statement of what happened. Our government, NTSB, just said what happened. They never got into the why. It's the same track record they got. They're not figuring out why. Prevention is going to come from figuring out why and preventing the why off of this. We all know what happened. Yes, we do. So in light of that, I got the NTSB's actual, quote, probable cause, and then I've written my own on top of it that I think you're going to enjoy. They put one probable cause. I've got 15. All of them are important. I'm going to read them in order. I'm also going to put these on-screen graphics so that you can see them carefully. This is fascinating. But out of the 15 failures, I've got 15 failures in here that I'm going to read you. It's easy to sit back in my leather chair and armchair quarterback all the failures. But there are some nugget lessons to be learned off of this. Out of all the failures, the 2 shining star flight attendants from the flight attendant industry, these 2 girls, Kathy Lemoyne and Sandy Pearl, these girls are rock stars. Kathy just died a few years ago. Sandy Pearl is still alive. These girls figured out on their own what was going on and sprang into action on board that airplane. They saved a lot of lives before it crashed. After the crash, they got free of the airplane, worked among the fire and debris, still pulling people out and getting them to safety. Unbelievable. And they had no warning, no cockpit communication, They did this on their own. They devised what they needed to do, and they did it. Probably the best para-flight attendant outcome that you could have ever got. If there's any hero out of this tragedy, those two girls, I'm going to list your failures. These two girls are not failures. These two girls are unbelievable. And I'll get into that. I've got my interview with Sandy Pearl. She's going to talk about that. And you'll see me interviewing her as we get up here. But the NTSB probable cause, I'm going to read it. Total and unique loss of thrust from both engines while the aircraft was penetrating an area of severe thunderstorms. The loss of thrust was caused by the ingestion of massive amounts of water and hail, which, in combination with thrust lever movement, induced severe stalling in and major damage to the engine compressors. Major contributing factors include the failure of the company's dispatching system to provide the flight crew with up-to-date severe weather information pertaining to the aircraft's intended route of flight, the captain's reliance on airborne weather radar for penetration of thunderstorm areas, and limitations in the FAA's ATC system, which precluded the timely dissemination of real-time hazardous weather information to the flight crew. Now, I've got the entire cockpit voice recorder transcript, and I picked through that. I have learned a lot of this, and guess what? I've got Dan's DTSB probable cause. I got 15 of those I'm going to read right here, right now. This is, follow me through on this. This is you're going to come out of your seat over these. Number one, Dan's DTSB probable cause. The incorrect decision by dispatch to release Flight 242 at that time on standard direct Rome, direct Atlanta IFR routing, knowing full well that the developing line of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes was directly in this proposed routing. Dispatch knew it. Dispatch is responsible for not launching that flight if they know that kind of stuff. Hold them on the ground, let the line pass, don't send them out into that. They knew how bad it was and they sent them anyway. Once airborne, the captain's critical decision to penetrate weather rather than avoid known area of severe weather. That was number two. Number three, upon realization by the flight crew that thunderstorm penetration was inevitable, the failure of the flight crew to select ignition, both or ignition continuous prior to entering heavy rain. Prevent your engines from flaming out. Select ignition continuous, or some airplanes can ignition both prior to going in the rain. 4, upon realization by the flight crew that thunderstorm penetration was inevitable, the failure of the flight crew to select APU start run prior to entering heavy rain. If you think you might have a power interruption and things are not looking good, it's a freebie. Start the APU, get an extra pneumatic, hydraulic, and electrical source going here right now. Who knows, you might need it. If it turns out you don't need it, you wasted about $7 worth of jet fuel, and that's it. Don't worry about it. 5, the failure of the NTSB, FAA, ALPA, and the airline industry to have recommended and previously published and trained flight crews of turbojet equipment, loss of thrust, all engines, to a memory item and the critical throttle position information required for read light or air start. We'll get into that in a second. But this crew did not have memory item, and they not have training. They didn't know what they didn't know here. Number 6, the failure of the captain to declare an emergency even when prompted by the first officer. On the CVR, the first officer says, "Bill, declare an emergency." Bill, hey, Bill, declare an emergency. Bill doesn't do it. 7, the adamant and unnecessary order by ATC to climb to an altitude previously cleared below in a previous clearance. So they lose 2 engines and they're descending. They get down to 14. ATC yells at them to go back up to 15,000 feet, and they try to do it. Now, what do you do in order to climb? You're going to add 2 throttles for 2 engines that they're trying to get spooled up. 8, the failure of the flight crew to clearly communicate to ATC the level of peril that resulted in the lack of timely understanding by ATC. 9, the captain's blind following of the ATC order to climb back up during a loss of thrust scenario. Are you kidding me? 10, the advancement of both throttle levers by first officer in response to command by ATC to climb back up to 15,000 feet, which in turn dumped raw fuel from the engine's fuel controller units, FCUs, into both engine hot sections simultaneously, which then caused high core temperatures, meltdown, and destruction of 6 critical compressor stages in each engine at the same time. So they lose 2 engines. They're trying to start them. ATC says to go back up. They jam throttles forward. They fried their own engines. They could have saved their engines. You know how to start a jet engine. We started with throttles at idle. Don't dump all that fuel in there now. What's it going to do to your EGTs and everything else? It's going to go. You're going to melt that stuff. That's too much fuel. 11 at 4:08:55 on tape on this CVR, it says he responds to ATC and he says, "We're trying to get it up there." They actually tried to climb with a dual engine failure. Number 11, the CRM damaged and incited by ALPA, Airline Pilots Association, public separation of member versus non-member. The captain was an ALPA non-member, publicly posted by ALPA as a scab. How's that for a cockpit environment? You got a scab flying with a non-scab. 12, the decision of the FO to select gear down highway landing instead of gear up open field landing as ordered by the captain. The captain's on record saying, we're going to take an open field and we're going to go gear up. First officer, he's flying the airplane, it's his leg. We're going to take gear down, we're going to land it on a highway. The co-pilot just did what he wanted to do. Number 13, the lack of care exhibited by flight crew in alerting the flight attendants and passengers at any point of the possible emergency landing, even when one of the flight attendants came up to the cabin on her own initiative for a face-to-face briefing of the situation. There was ample opportunity during the 12 minutes that elapsed from first loss of engine thrust until impact to brief the cabin crew and passengers concerning critical cabin preparations. Number 14, the lack of captain authority demonstrated and exhibited by the captain during this crisis. This captain wasn't really a captain. He was along for the ride. The FO was running the show, and that's all there was to it. Number 15, the failure of the NTSB, FAA, and ALPA and the airline industry in general to publish and train loss of thrust, all engines, memory items, and the associated critical throttle position information required for a relight or aircraft restart as a result of this accident. So even after this happened, we still don't have critical information from anybody on the memory items or what to do or how to restart these things from memory. What's the throttle position supposed to be? Number one, you should declare an emergency and not try to climb back up. Let's read the NTSB board summary of this thing. This was not a hail problem. Hail didn't wipe these engines out. The safety board further concludes that the lack of typical foreign object damage, including hail damage from known encounters to the fan blades and the forward stages of the low-pressure compressors, clearly indicates that hail ingestion was not responsible for the compressor damage. Following the damage to the compressors and turbines, the engines were no longer capable of producing thrust. Hail had nothing to do with it. They flamed them out, tried to start at advanced power to try to get back up to 15,000 feet, dumped fuel in there, wiped out 2 hot sections at the same time. Yes, I'm fired up. This is what really happened. NTSB just says, well, they flew into a thunderstorm and wiped out 2 engines and landed on a highway, and that's what happened. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. All right, so let's get to the stuff here. I had Brenda, also had my son Drew on this trip with us yesterday. Drew's also an ATP and a jet pilot. Learning opportunity for Drew. We talked about jet engines in flight. I raised this kid from a pup. He's a jet pilot, and we talked about jet engines and restart learning opportunity. Let's cut right now to the opening scene from Drew Grider.
So today is April 4th, 2021. We're here at the site of the crash 44 years ago today. Southern Air Flight 242 came through directly through these trees, landed just a few yards away. So we're going to be going over a couple of the facts of the crash, different incidents that's happened, and in-person interviews. So we're out here traipsing around the yard looking for airplane parts once again with Dad, and you're about to watch Probable Cause.
I can't believe you're here.
I told you I was coming.
All right, so we're on the actual highway right here on the anniversary, April 4, 1977. We got the Sheriff's Department stopping traffic for me out here. This is the highway where the DC-9 first touched down. These guys were nice enough to stop traffic for just a second so we could shoot this video. And then I'm gonna head on over to the memorial. A whole bunch of people have gathered here today, but appreciate you guys helping us out here today and keeping everything safe for us. Well, you talk about a surreal experience. DC-9 loses 2 engines in flight, makes a dead stick landing onto a highway, April 4 of 1977. 21 people survived. 8 of them are still alive today, and of those 8, at least 1, maybe 2 are here today. This is the memorial service, and the community has rallied in these years and built a fabulous 501c3 and a memorial to those lost that day and the lives affected off of this accident. I'll show real quick here. There's a lot of people here, and they're set up to live stream this thing here in a few minutes. But a lot of people here today, and this memorial. I want to show you this memorial here. They built. Of course, I have the NTSB probable cause in my hand, and boy, am I going to rip into this eventually. You're not going to believe it. But yes, they got it wrong. In fact, they got it so wrong that the NTSB at the time even dissented with themselves over this. They got it wrong just like they do today. Hang on. Honored to stand next to Sandy Pearl, one of the 2 flight attendants on 242, and I got a couple questions I just got to ask you. You know, you knew something was wrong right away. What did it sound like when the DC-9 went quiet, when the engines went out? Is that something that you remember as like, we haven't ever heard one do this before?
Oh, absolutely. You knew when you lost the second engine. I thought the left one had caught on fire and was detached from the aircraft. And then the second one went. And that was just, everything happens in split seconds for this.
Right. How quiet did it get in the DC-9 when both engines were?
It was pretty quiet, but because Kathy and I both quickly went into action for preparing the cabin for an emergency landing.
All right, so standing here with Tricia Kiltrica, and she was Tricia Reeves at the time on April 4 of 1977. Tricia, tell me again, we were starting to talk a minute ago. This was your husband that was on this flight, and where were you when you heard that this airplane went down?
I was driving home from work on the Stone Mountain Freeway,
And how did you hear about it?
the radio.
So it just came on AM, and then did you know right away?
I had a feeling right away, yes,
How much information did they give you on the radio?
just that the plane had crashed.
And you knew that,
It was just a feeling. I knew he was on that plane, even though he was not supposed to be.
right? And after it crashed, did you come out here that night, or did you stay away, or where did you go?
No, I didn't find out he was on the plane and had been identified till about midnight that night.
How about the next day or the day after? What were your days after the crash like?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I know within the week we were here.
Right. And you came out here and saw it and everything?
Yeah, the fuselage was still in place
Right.
when I came out.
Right. So you were living in the area here someplace, and your husband was traveling for business, I guess?
He was.
And did they give you any information from the company that he worked for, his work associates, when you started calling around that evening and trying to figure out?
No one knew where he was and said he had plenty of time to make the flight.
Yeah.
The rental car had been turned in,
Right.
but I couldn't confirm he was on the flight
Right.
at that time.
How many times have you been back here to this spot since 1977?
At least a dozen. We moved out of the area and we were gone for at least 10, 15 years and
Right.
moved back, and I've been here. Usually I come on the 4th of April
Right.
every year.
As a lot of people do. Well, our condolences for if your loss. I know that was a horrible time and something to go through, and such a tragic, but I'm very happy with the outpouring of love and care that you can just
This has
feel.
been wonderful. It's been great, and the monument is beautiful.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
it really is. Well, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm here today with, now tell me your name again.
Mary Ann Forrester.
Mary Ann and
Tracy Wagner.
Tracy. The crazy, interesting thing here is that their mother was on Flight 242 when it crashed here. And at the time, in 1977, you were what?
15 years old.
You were 15.
17.
You were 17. So where were you guys at when you got the phone call? What was going on? You were back in Alabama?
No, we lived in Boca Raton, Florida, and my twin sister and I were staying in the condo that we lived in
Right.
by ourselves while they were gone.
I see.
We had somebody watching over us, but my twin sister was watching the news, the 6 o'clock news, and she started screaming.
Because she knew what flight they were on.
Yeah, and I was like, she's like, Mommy and Dad were in a plane crash. Mommy and Dad were in, I was like, you don't know that? You do not know that. You need to calm down. You don't. She's like, no. I talked to Mommy this morning. She gave me the flight number. I know it's their flight. I know. And I'm just like, let's call Francis.
And you were in
Rhodes.
Florida at the same time?
No, I was living in Virginia at the time with our father.
I see. And how did you find out about it? What was your first indication that there's anything wrong?
My brother and I were driving to put a bank deposit in the bank for my dad in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we were driving and the news came on the radio about there was a plane crash near Atlanta, and I immediately said, oh my God, Mommy's flying today.
Right.
And, that was just totally out of the blue.
Yeah.
And then we got confirmation, as time went along, so.
Yeah, and it was instant nationwide news. There's for an airliner, this was a big one, and I flew the DC-9 for Delta, so I flew a lot of airplanes for Delta, but the DC-9 is one that I know very, very well, and I just wanted to ask you both while I got the camera running here, did you ever hear after the fact what actually caused the crash? Did they ever tell you?
Just that both engines ingested hail.
Right.
The windshield cracked and so forth. They were trying to land on a highway, and they found a highway, and then as they were trying to land, the wings clipped utility poles and so forth.
Did you hear anything different?
Yes. Well, in addition to that, the pilots were looking at the onboard radar, and it gave kind of a false impression that if they went to the certain area, it would be better, and they actually flew into the worst part of the weather.
They actually flew into the worst part. So the NTSB produced a probable cause. Would it surprise you to know that I think that they got it wrong?
Really?
Yeah. I'll give you the 30-second video eclipse here of what happened, but they did fly into an area that they should not have flown into, but it wasn't hail that caused the damage to the engines. What happened is the water flames out those engines, just like if you had a candle in the rain is going to put the candle out. So a jet engine operates what they call a flame on the inside. The hail didn't do any damage. The water flamed them out. The pilots, when they flamed out, they sunk from 15,000 down to 14,000, and it broke the windshield, and it wasn't looking good, but ATC demanded that they go back up to 15,000 because they busted their altitude. So when they did this, they added throttle, and adding throttle to two engines that have flamed out and are just starting to spool up dumps a bunch of fuel in there. They actually fried their own engines. The pilots added so much throttle, if they would have left it alone and done an air start without adding throttle and trying to climb back up, the main thing is the pilots never declared an emergency. And on the CVR, the co-pilot says several different times, he tells the captain, he says, declare an emergency, because as soon as you declare an emergency, you can do any altitude you want. The captain was still trying to get up to 15,000. He adds throttle. They toasted both engines just like that. And then they're going to be a glider, and the only thing they had left was this road right here. And that's what really happened. And I'm curious to know if you've ever heard anything like that before.
No, I didn't know that, no. I thought it was hail, but,
Yeah, in the teardown of the engines.
More sense.
Yeah, in the teardown of the engines, hail did not cause the damage. The damage was caused by the internal compressor sections that came apart as a result of adding too much throttle at the wrong time. And you will destroy a jet engine that's trying to spool up by giving it too much fuel. You're dumping raw fuel into a little fire, and it burns it up. They burnt up two engines at the same time as the two engines that they needed. They could have made it to an airport.
Well, there was one closer than what they were sent to. I heard that.
Several different. They shouldn't have turned into the storm in the first place, but they should have declared an emergency. They should have left their throttles at idle, and they never told the flight attendants anything that was going on in back. The flight attendants, Sandy and the other girl, figured it out at the last second that they're about to crash. They did all the work. But anyway, I'm very sorry for your loss. I know that must have been a shock to hear that Mommy and Daddy are on this thing and they didn't make it out. And lessons learned. So that's all we're trying to do is go back after the fact and review some of the things that are a little bit lesser known about that we can still learn from today.
Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you for
Thank you so
talking to
much.
me.
Yes.
Thank you. And again, our condolences for your loss on that day. That's
Thank you.
thank you. All right, so I'm sorry, tell me your first name again.
Jack Williamson.
Jack Williamson. Your brother James Williamson was on the airplane.
Correct.
And where were you when you heard about the flight and that James had been killed on this? Where were you?
I was at my father's house.
Close by around here?
No, Milton, Florida,
Milton, Florida.
which is east of Pensacola.
Right. So you were down there. Where was your brother headed to when this happened?
He was headed back to Fort Gordon, Augusta, Georgia.
Okay. So he was going to go.
He was from Huntsville to Atlanta, then back to Fort Gordon.
Right. And how did you hear about the crash? What did it come on the radio, or who told you?
Came on TV,
Came on TV.
and we knew he was on the flight
But you didn't know whether he made it or not.
for a day and a half.
A day and a half.
Right.
No idea.
No idea, because they were afraid to release names of somebody that they thought might have been deceased that wasn't.
Right.
So they had to account for every passenger before they released any name.
Right. Now, how old was your brother at the time?
29.
And did he have any family?
Had 3 children, a son, 2 daughters, and of course his wife.
And where are they today?
His wife died 2 weeks after my father,
Right.
and she was depressed since the crash.
Right.
She
right.
never recovered.
Never
from that.
recovered. What about the 3 kids?
One is a lawyer in New Orleans. The oldest girl is a teacher in Alexandria, Virginia. And the youngest one works for the school system in Panama City, Florida.
So, how about your parents? Were they alive when this happened?
Yes, my mother, I get broken up now.
It's all right.
She had been an invalid for about 8 years.
Right.
And the last word she spoke ever was what happened. And she had not spoken for 2 years.
And when she said what happened, was she?
She knew something that had happened. She could still hear us talking. She was bedridden for 16 years. And that was the last word she ever spoke, and spoken to my wife.
Mm.
And my father, I guess what got him the worst, he was a B-17 pilot in 1943 in England in the 92nd Bomb Group. He flew all of his missions. He flew both raids to Schweinfurt, which were the greatest Air Force loss in history, those 2 raids.
Mm-hmm.
Survived all of that. And then
this. Yeah.
But he spent a lot of time with my wife and I, and he wasn't depressed
Right.
like
Right.
she was. He accepted it, and he had a good life. Lived to be 84.
Let me ask you this: in all these years after it, did they ever tell you what happened? What caused this crash?
Yes,
What-
he was flying, and they told him to go between 2 thunderstorms. And by the time he got to them, they combined, and hail hit his windshield and went through his engines. Both engines went out. The windshield went out in it.
Yeah, and that's partly true. I'm going to give you a 30-second summary that you can do a little bit of research on.
Okay.
Part of that is true. They did fly through weather, but it wasn't hail that snuffed out their
Snuffed the
engines.
engine?
It was rain.
Rain got him. Okay.
Rain snuffed out the engines. Hail did break the windshield, but hail didn't
Snuff the engine.
snuff the engines.
I got
Water will snuff these engines out.
I got it.
Now, the airplane was flying at 15,000 feet. When they lost both engines, they sunk down to 14,000 feet, which means they busted in altitude.
Right.
And this is an airplane I know about because I'm a DC-9 captain myself.
Right.
When they went down to 14,000 ATC, the government started yelling at them, and they tried to climb. So what do you need to do to climb from 14 back up to 15?
You need power.
You need power. They added power. The thing you can't do on the JT8D engine is add power, add fuel when it's trying to start because it fries the engines. They added throttle to try to get back to 15 when the engines were in the process of trying to relight.
Restart.
They had fire in there, but they dumped fuel in it. They toasted both engines at the same time, trying to get back, and then they had two engines that were not going to be recoverable. We call that frying an engine.
I got you.
6 stages of compressor got burned up and toasted and went to smithereens with all that fuel in there.
Yeah.
The pilots did it. The main thing they should have done was declare an emergency. And I don't know if you ever read the cockpit voice recorder. The co-pilot says, "Bill, declare an emergency." He tells the captain, "Declare an emergency," which means you can do anything you want with the altitude. He never declared an emergency, and he tried like crazy to get back up to 15,000 feet. And couldn't. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
He should have closed the throttles and said, "We'll go down to 9. I don't care, but I want these engines to run."
Right.
Would have fixed it. And that's what caused this crash.
I got you. I got you.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I didn't know all of that on the pilot's part. I'd always given him credit for doing the best he could, you know, and the crew. That's all you can do.
Yep.
But,
Well, we appreciate you.
I
we
appreciate
talking.
it. Thank you, ma'am.
It's got the name of James Williamson right here.
Right.
Right here, and that's your brother.
That's it, brother. Only brother I had.
Yep. Well, I'm certainly sorry for your
Well, I
your loss, sir.
appreciate it. I
And,
appreciate it.
Thanks for coming out and talking to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're here today near the crash site of the DC-9 Southern Airways DC-9 1335 uniform. 44 years ago today is Easter Sunday. We've been here talking to survivors, families of victims of this crash. I want to show you right here is a big part of the crash. This was Sadie Burkholder's home here. And during the recovery efforts, there were 22 survivors of this crash. During the recovery efforts, this home was turned into a makeshift hospital. So the reason it was turned into a makeshift hospital is because there were survivors. And I met Sandy today. She was the flight attendant, one of the flight attendants, one of 2 on that flight. And she's an incredible individual. She is fierce to this day, and I can see how she saved 22 lives on that plane, and I do accredit most of it to her. She had them in brace position. She had no alert whatsoever from the cockpit that they were even going down. She figured that out for herself and saved those 22 lives.
All right, so we were talking about this tree, and you were in the very back of the DC-9 in the aft flight attendant jump seat, and the other flight attendant was all the way forward. But this piece right here ended up the furthest downfield. So how did the airplane flip about like that?
Well, the right wing clipped a telephone pole.
Right.
It catapulted the aircraft to the left. They came right down center line.
Right.
And they hit the Newman's grocery store a little farther down the street.
Right.
Where the gas pumps were, and the children and the mothers were killed. And it's a Maxi Lube or something now.
Right.
But
so how many people on the ground, innocent people on the ground, got killed?
9.
9. And then you ended up coming out of the airplane, and it was on fire, and the aft, very back part of the tail of the DC-9 was up against this tree, and you were able to find a way out.
You say the tail. You keep bringing the tail up to me. That tail was sitting up here in front of me. It was not detached to the piece of airplane I was in.
What was
it? Was me and the engines and the bathrooms. No seat rows were attached, and nothing behind my door.
So it was just a piece of the airplane?
Yes, all by myself.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think I did see pictures of the tail laying off over there.
Right.
The actual tail. Mm-hmm. So the tail broke off, and you were sitting just ahead of the tail.
We were rolling.
Right, right.
So that motion broke the aircraft.
Yeah, it broke.
And you got to understand, this was full of pine trees.
Right. Yeah, the whole thing was.
Yeah.
And then the house where Miss Burkholder lived was right over there. you immediately started, even though you were injured, you started helping passengers, trying to get them away from the fire and get them over to the house.
Yeah.
Right away.
Not to the house. I was just trying to get them to the edge of the road.
Right.
Kathy went in the house over here.
Right.
And they went out the back with her with a creek.
And you were just trying to get the people that were able to get out. You're still trying to get them
Well,
out.
that's just pulling them away from the fire and getting them to stop running and lay down, and then you'd reach for something and there wouldn't be anything attached.
Right. Well, it's an amazing story, and you know, flight attendants, sometimes they don't get the credit for the job that they do and being ready. I think your story is amazing because you had the presence of mind to think, figure it out, and solve a problem. You knew that airplane was going down. You did the preparation without even being told. You did the advanced things that some people might not have even thought about in advance. You probably saved a whole bunch of lives that might have been lost. You really did.
Thank you for what you're saying in regards to the profession. And all I can say, the way I've learned to live with it best, is knowing I did do my job.
Oh, you did more than your job.
Well, for the situation, and years later, and healing and growing from where you've been, you look at it backwards, and you can say it in different ways.
I'm a pilot and you're a flight attendant. Us pilots have a job to let you flight attendants know what's going on. You didn't get that communication. You had to figure it out and take command of the situation and get that cabin ready the best you could, fast, knowing what you knew. And somebody even looked out the windows and saw pine trees and recognized to give the brace command, because we're only seconds from impact, and that was you.
Yes.
So you looked at...
I had to go forward because a passenger got up and started pulling things out of the overhead compartment.
Right.
And that evidently saved his life. But I had to see his seatbelt rebuckled because we'd already completed our safety check for the aircraft.
Right.
To see what was going to happen.
But in the last few seconds, you got on the PA and said, brace, brace, brace.
Right.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you again for, it's mesmerizing for me just to be with you on this spot with this tree is crazy. Thank you very much.
It's awesome to be alive. Thank you.
Totally amazing. Mr. Boney, tell me what you're holding here.
Dad, this is a remnants of a flap track that came off of Southern Airways aircraft DC-9 that crashed in New Hope April 4th, 1944. And we just walked around at the crash site, and they found this flap track that came off that airplane. A piece of it just laying out here. Nobody had ever found it, ever got it.
So the roller would have ridden in here?
Yeah, the roller. This thing here goes way on up here like this.
Right.
And the roller comes down like that.
And what kind of rivets are those right there? Are those
Hylocks.
Are they hylocks?
Called hylocks.
Okay. Yeah. So this thing's got some absolute detail in it. That's the track. That's the hylocks, and that's a beefy piece. When they ask for flaps full before landing, this is the piece of the roller track that
it's sitting up here like this, and it comes back like that when you come all the way down. It's at an angle to start with, you know, as you select flaps 1, flaps 2, whatever. And then full flaps comes all around that, and it dumps the flap down.
Did you ever hear on this crash where the pilots were at 15,000 feet and they lost both engines and they tried to restart, but they went down to 14,000 feet and ATC was yelling at them? They actually added throttle. Did you ever see in the report where the engines were actually trashed, not necessarily by the hail, but by the fact that they added way too much throttle while the engines were trying to start?
No, I know you're supposed to pull them back to idle to start them.
Right.
But I never thought about that. You know, it got some safety shut off or something like that. I don't know, because I've cranked it 100 times. You know, because it's real simple. You know, as you get it spin it up, you turn your ignition on first, spin the engine up, get up to what, 20%, then bring your fuel up, and it starts, it goes.
Yeah, but
now if you had it up to...
Yeah, that's a normal start. Right. These guys they already had rotation and they turned ignition on. They actually had it lit. This is all in the report, but they were trying to climb back up to 15,000 feet instead of declaring an emergency, they went to almost full throttle while they were trying to start them both. And that's what wiped out the core of that engine.
But it wiped the edges out.
That's what did it. It wasn't the hail.
Right.
Did you ever hear anything about that?
No, I haven't. That's a mystery to me.